Third video. The first two tutorial videos have got lots of clicks, but also by looking at the stats I can see that people on average are only listening for about 4 minutes, so I'm encouraged to make these essays or these tutorials shorter. So we're on our Brightspace page. If you go under essay assignment, go to the rubric again. You'll see some topics where we covered, plagiarism, some details here we're not going to touch today, but we'll look at essay content. And we have a series of questions that we want you to have answers to that should be content that you'll be including in your essay. So we don't want you to do this in point form, like copy the question in and then answer it, but we want you to be reading your scientific paper, taking notes with these questions in mind, and then write that into a coherent and smooth essay format. So what was the motivation for the research that you are basing your essay on? And this question is here because I wanted to emphasize that it's not typically that they were looking for a new species. It was that they came across one because they were doing other kinds of research. Now you'll find some their motivation often outlaid in their introduction to the paper. Sometimes you can find it in other parts of the paper as well, including even the acknowledgments at the end, where you may find the motivation for why they're publishing this work. So an example would be that there are beetle species that live within termite colonies, and so there was a group that was doing evolutionary research. So we're trying to figure out how does that interrelationship evolve. So they wanted to get as many pairings of termite species and beetle species that are living in this way, and in sampling broadly, they were also discovered species that had not been formally described, and so they took time out to write a paper to describe some of those new beetle species. And so that was in a paper last year that I recall. And so the motivation there was to understand this evolutionary process, not to look for new species. And so that's why that question's there, that your paper may have, the researchers may have had a different motivation than actually trying to find a new species. So that was what was motivation. Where does this species fall in the higher levels of taxonomic grouping? So in animals, it's phyla, or in singular phylum, and in plants, it's typically division, which is the equivalent of phylum. And so you can go and read generally about that. So if you have a plant, you go to your textbook, and in chapters 29 and 30, you'll see some of that higher level taxonomic discussion. And in chapters 32, or in chapter 32, is a similar discussion for the animals. So I'm certain that you'll know whether your paper is a plant or an animal, and then you can go to your textbook to look that up. But here's another thing that you might do, and if you recall, the paper that I found in the first video was an anolis lizard. So when I put anoles into Google, I was able to click over to the Wikipedia page. And you see with the Wikipedia page here, the scientific classification of the genus Anoles puts the phylum in Chordata. All right? And giving you some information there. Now I would encourage you not to use a Wikipedia page as a reference, although you're able to, and that's only because it is a resource that is edited by the readers, and so you can't always be certain of the content. But you can take this clue from the wiki and then go to your textbook and read about the Chordata if your Anoles or your species is also a lizard species or an animal with a backbone. Then, and also in our textbook, you'll find detail about what are the characteristics that place an animal within that phyla. Okay, so that's a couple of ways you can do it, but we are expecting you to be citing the scientific paper that you have and also citing your textbook as the two minimum citations that we expect for a perfect essay. All right. So that's how you might find out phyla or division, and how you find out what are the key characteristics. And this is important because you'll find that the authors will not be writing this kind of detail for you in their introduction to the paper. So you're going to need another resource typically for that. What techniques did the researcher or group use that enabled them to detect this new species? So this is a challenge. It's not a challenge to figure out because you go right to the methods and it'll be clearly stated what they did, whether it was morphological measurements they were taking or some sort of sequencing genetic analysis that they were doing. The problem is that there's lots of complicated language there, and we want you to figure out how you can say that more plainly and simply within the short essay that you're writing for this class. All right, but then you go to the methods. Now, why was your species only described recently? And this could be something that's closely related to the question that's immediately above, right? Perhaps it was the use of genetic sequence data that revealed potential cryptic species, so that we thought there was one species, but in fact genetic information now says that there are two. Then when we look at those populations more closely, we have a new species. So that could be why it was described only recently, because it was right in front of us, and it's with these modern tools that we were able to see that there were separately evolving entities that we call species. Or it could be that a region of the world had been having civil conflict for centuries. There was an example of 3 new fish species that were found in the Middle East just last year, and it was never safe for a group of modern biologists to go into that area until recently, and then there was a group that was able to go in. They sampled extensively from these unusual lakes, and among their discoveries were 3 new fish species to be described for science. All right, so that's the content. I think that the next essay will talk about the next tutorial will talk about the structure of the essay and then how to upload it onto Brightspace. But I'll call it quits there, and we'll talk to you later.